What legendary fighter group defied the odds and took to the skies over China in the fearsome Curtiss P-40, playing a vital role in the early days of World War II? That group was called the Flying Tigers. Today, we will dive deep into their story. In the late 1930s, the United States Army looked for a new fighter plane to modernize its air forces. The Curtiss-Wright company responded to this call with its Model 75 design. This single-engine all-metal fighter had novel low-drag wings and a powerful Allison engine. It was chosen and given the name P-40 Warhawk. In 1938, the first P-40s were produced at Curtiss plant. While the plane was considered modern during its time, it did not take long before some flaws were discovered. The efficiency of this machine was inferior to the German Bf-109 and other state-of-the-art opponents already in Europe. The P-40 was not the perfect plane for high-altitude combat, which was the main goal of U.S. Army Air Corps. Although it had drawbacks, the rugged and obstinate little fighter succeeded in becoming the main aerial workhorse of the USA. Tens of thousands were made and sent to the Allies fighting the Axis in different parts of the world. It was the fighter America had available when World War II began. Although inferior, the P-40 would become the airplane that was destined to write its own name in history. The most well-known squadron to fly the P-40 was posted in China in 1941. The first American volunteer group, or AVG, popularly called the Flying Tigers, was assigned to protect the Burma Road, a vital supply route. The Tigers were made up of volunteer pilots who wanted to gain combat experience before the United States joined the war. The chief of their group was Claire Lee Chanot, a retired U.S. Army Air Corps officer. Chanot had done his homework and knew how to defeat the Japanese fighters. He put shark mouth nose art on his Tigers to send the enemy into a panic during their daring hit-and-run strikes. Under Chanot's guidance, the Flying Tigers used unique team tactics that took advantage of the P-40's strengths. Despite being outperformed by the modern Japanese fighters at high altitude, the Tigers used the P-40's tight turning radius and dive speed to their advantage. Diving below the level of enemy bombers and fighters, the Warhawks would attack them as they headed towards their targets. The small band of AVG aces often launched during head-on attacks to shoot down their opponents. Over Burma and China, the Flying Tigers showed an amazing combat record with their P-40s in 1941 to 42. They claimed to have shot down 300 Japanese planes at the cost of only 16 pilots and 62 Warhawks. Fighter pilot Tex Hill became the first American ace during the war. The Tigers' accomplishments stimulated American patriotism and defiance. The theaters of Europe, North Africa, the Pacific, and Asia were the battlefields where the P-40 proved its mettle. Although the Warhawk was ill-equipped against newer Axis fighters, its superb dive performance and durability made it a formidable adversary. The U.S. Army Air Corps sent P-40 squadrons nicknamed the Desert Air Force to the Middle East in the early of 1942. Their old Warhawks participated in decisive battles from El Amin to Tunisia. Allied fighter ace Billy Drake achieved more than 20 kills while flying the reliable P-40. The P-40s of the 49th Fighter Group in the Southwest Pacific, although outdated, helped to slow the Japanese advance from New Guinea to the Philippines. Although they suffered heavy losses, their brave pilots protected the Australian mainland and disrupted enemy supply lines. The Warhawk was undoubtedly at its best in ground attack roles in every theater. At treetop level, P-40 pilots flew over jungles and mountains, strafing and bombing enemy targets and convoys. The sturdy build of the fighter, which could take on a lot of battle damage, saved many pilots' lives. The P-40s during the battle over the major island of Guadalcanal in 1942-43 fought a very tough defense of the Allied forces against the Zeros that came to raid. The renowned Cactus Air Force had some of the best aces, like James Flatley, who racked up some of the highest kill counts in nerve-wracking aerial combat. The Tigers were the winners. Even though it had some shortcomings against newer enemy fighters, the P-40 was still a very important aircraft in the Allied victory. It would be the savior of the day as it stopped the tide of Axis advance in multiple theaters until the new aircraft could be deployed in massive numbers. The P-40, the humble fighter, proved its worth in the theaters of Europe, North Africa, the Pacific, and Asia. Although the Warhawk was no match for the newer Axis fighters, it was still able to keep up due to its superior diving performance and durability. As America's aviation industry geared up for total war, the P-40 made up the bulk of Allied fighter forces in 1942 to 43. It provided crucial air cover for bombing raids, strafing runs, and naval operations that ultimately crippled the Axis powers. By being expendable, the humble Warhawk paved the way for costlier fighters. In the end, over 13,000 rugged P-40s were built across various innovative models. They gave fledgling American pilots like the Flying Tigers valuable combat experience. Many aces, including 38 pilots who achieved ace status in the Warhawk alone, went on to fly more advanced P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts later in the war. The P-40's legacy is immortalized through the achievements of the storied AVG Flying Tigers in China. Their bold exploits defending the Burma Road proved the lethality of Chennault's fighter tactics. By the war's end, the Tigers had racked up over 290 kills, while training the first generation of pilots that would go on to victory. While far from the most sophisticated or lethal fighter, P-40 Warhawk embodied the underdog spirit of American resistance against the Axis powers. In the early years of World War II, the scrappy plane was all the struggling Allies had to defend themselves. Despite glaring shortcomings in speed, firepower, and high-altitude performance, the P-40 endured on every front. Taking on modern adversaries like the Bf-109 and Zero, it persisted through attrition and obsolescence to notch respectable kill records. Yet the tough little fighter's true impact can't be measured in statistics alone. For pilots tasked with flying the obsolete Warhawk into harm's way, it was a bare-bones symbol of freedom against tyranny's cutting edge. Many beloved squadron mascots paid tribute to the aircraft's underdog, never-say-die character. Nowhere was this determined spirit more embodied than within the legendary Flying Tigers in China. Their shark-mouthed P-40s personified the raw aggression and hit-and-run tactics that became hallmarks of Chennault's genius. When the chips were down against overwhelming odds, the gritty Warhawk fighters doubled down. The P-40 was far from perfect. It lacked the refinement of the Spitfire, the versatility of the P-51 Mustang, and the lethality of the P-47 Thunderbolt. But its rugged simplicity captured the hearts and loyalty of thousands of young Allied pilots, thrown into desperate battles for survival. Even as superior fighters emerged, many aces never lost a soft spot for their first trusty steed, the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. In the decades since World War II, the P-40's humble legacy has only grown more cemented in the annals of aviation history. Today, scores of Warhawk fighters can be found restored and on display in museums around the globe. In the United States, institutions such as the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, the Flying Heritage Museum in Seattle, and the Prima Air and Space Museum in Arizona have P-40s that are perfectly preserved, wearing their classic wartime markings and nose art. Private collectors still flaunt their models at air shows around the world. The legacy of the Warhawk has been the subject of many books and films focusing on the most known squadrons and aces. Movies such as John Wayne's 1942 film Flying Tigers and the classic 1966 war movie The Way to the Sky are among those that helped to make the P-40 one of the most famous planes in history. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this.